You're just a maid. Know your place.
His jaw clenched so tight it hurt. His fiancée's voice, sharp, cutting, venomous, carried from the dining room below. But it was the silence that followed that made his blood run cold. Because he knew Lila. And Lila never stayed silent when she was truly hurt. In his right hand, an encrypted phone with messages from 3 rival gangs. In his left, a whiskey glass he'd been holding for the past 20 minutes, untouched. In his mind, a decision he'd been avoiding for 4 years. He had exactly 60 seconds before everything he'd built, his empire, his reputation, his carefully constructed walls, came crashing down around one simple truth. He was in love with the woman his fiancée was destroying downstairs. But to understand how a Korean mafia boss ended up here, in this mansion, with this impossible choice, with his heart and his honor tearing him apart, the story must go back. Back to 5 years ago. Back to a rainy Tuesday in October when 2 people from completely different worlds collided in the most unexpected way. This is a story that spans 2 continents, 5 years, and 3 moments that should have ended everything. And it starts with a woman who refused to bow. Before Jin Soo and Lila ever knew the other existed, they were living in shadows, his cast by power, hers by survival. But fate has a way of pulling people into the light, whether they're ready or not. October 14th, 2014. Gangnam District, Seoul. Jin Soo was 32 years old, and he'd already killed 3 men. Not with his own hands, he was too smart for that, but with orders given in quiet rooms, with agreements sealed over expensive whiskey, with the kind of cold calculation that kept him at the top of Seoul's underground for 7 years. His morning started at 5 a.m. in a penthouse gym, working through the rage that never quite left his body. Breakfast was black coffee and whatever his private chef prepared, usually untouched. By 7 a.m., he was in his office at the import-export company that served as a front for moving everything from information to weapons across East Asia. The Choi family business, built by his grandfather, expanded by his father, perfected by him. Meetings with politicians at 9 a.m., lunch with investors at noon. The legitimate kind who asked no questions. Afternoons reviewing shipment routes, settlement disputes, handling the 1,000 small fires that came with running an empire most people didn't know existed. His home was a fortress in Gangnam. 8 bedrooms, 4,000 square feet of marble and glass and original artwork that meant nothing to him. He lived there alone except for security staff who knew not to speak unless spoken to. His father had died when Jin Soo was 19, stomach cancer that ate him alive over 18 months. His mother followed 3 years later, officially a heart attack, but Jin Soo knew it was grief. She'd loved a dangerous man and paid the price. He swore he'd never let emotions make him vulnerable like that. Jin-ah entered his life 2 years before this story begins. The daughter of an allied crime family, beautiful and ambitious and strategic. Their engagement wasn't about love, it was about consolidating power, merging territories, creating an empire that would be untouchable. She fit into his world perfectly. She asked for nothing except status and freedom to live her life. She never questioned his business. She understood the game. What she didn't understand was the hollowness that had carved itself into Jin Soo's chest. The way he'd wake at 3 a.m. staring at the ceiling, wondering if this was all there was. Power, money, fear, loneliness disguised as success. His previous relationships, brief, transactional, empty. Women who wanted his money or his status or the thrill of danger. None who saw him. None he trusted enough to let them try. He told himself he didn't need connection. That vulnerability was weakness, that his grandfather and father had built this empire on strength, not sentiment. On that October morning in 2014, Jin Soo stood in front of his bathroom mirror, adjusting his tie, preparing for another day of calculated moves and controlled power. He had no idea that in 72 hours, a woman would walk into his mansion and completely shatter every wall he'd built. But first, the story shifts 8,000 kilometers away to a completely different kind of struggle. October 14th, 2014, Atlanta, Georgia. Lila Thompson was 27 years old, and she'd just lost everything for the second time in her life. Her apartment, gone, because she'd spent her rent money on her mother's medication. Her job at the hospital, gone, because she'd missed too many shifts taking care of that same mother. Her savings, $342 in a checking account that had held $15,000 just 8 months earlier. Stage 4, breast cancer doesn't care about plans. Lila's morning started at 6 a.m. with prayer, a habit from childhood she'd never broken, even when she stopped believing anyone was listening. Her mother had been a worship leader at Greater Faith Baptist Church for 30 years. Lila grew up in those pews, in that community, surrounded by a love that felt infinite. Her father died when she was 12, a construction accident that the company ruled operator error to avoid liability. Her mother worked 3 jobs to keep their small house in East Atlanta, to make sure Lila graduated high school, to send her to nursing school. And Lila had made it. Top of her class, job at Grady Memorial Hospital, apartment in a safe neighborhood, a future that looked bright. Then the diagnosis came. And Lila made the only choice she could. She became her mother's full-time caretaker. 8 months of watching the strongest woman she'd ever known waste away. 8 months of experimental treatments and false hope and 3 a.m. emergencies. 8 months of sacrificing everything to buy just a little more time. Her mother died on October 11th, 2014. On a Sunday morning, while the church choir sang, "His Eye is on the Sparrow," Lila held her hand and felt the moment her mama's soul left her body. 3 days later, Lila sat in that empty house surrounded by medical bills she couldn't pay, a funeral she'd charged to credit cards, and a future that had collapsed into nothing. Her previous relationships, there'd been Marcus, who left when the medical bills piled up. Before that, Devin, who wanted her to choose between him and nursing school, men who saw her strength and mistook it for not needing anyone. The truth was, Lila was exhausted, tired of being strong, tired of survival mode, tired of a world that took and never gave back. She had no family left. Her mother was an only child. Her father's family had scattered after his death. The church community helped where they could, but everyone was struggling. This was 2014 post-recession America, and there was no safety net. A friend from nursing school, Jennifer, who'd married a military contractor, mentioned an opportunity. Private domestic position, Interracial, South Korea. Room and board, plus salary that would clear Lila's debt in 2 years. Lila had never considered leaving America, had never imagined working as a maid. Her mother didn't raise her for that. But her mother also taught her, pride don't pay bills, baby, and dignity is how you carry yourself, not what you do. On October 17th, 2014, Lila Thompson boarded a plane to Seoul with 2 suitcases, a Bible her mother had annotated in the margins, and absolutely nothing left to lose. While Jin Soo was building walls, Lila was losing hers. While he was accumulating power, she was surrendering everything. 2 people who should never have met. 2 worlds that weren't supposed to collide. And then, on October 18th, 2014, they did. October 18th, 2014. 2:47 p.m., the Gangnam Mansion. Lila stood in the marble foyer, jet-lagged and disoriented, her 2 suitcases beside her like anchors to a life that already felt impossibly far away. The head of household staff, Mrs. Park, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and limited English, was giving her the tour. Lila nodded. understanding maybe one word in 5, trying to memorize room layouts and protocols and the 1,000 unspoken rules of working in a house like this. Everything was white. White marble, white walls, white leather, like living inside a museum where fingerprints were crimes. Jin Soo wasn't supposed to be home. His schedule had him in meetings until 7 p.m., but a deal had fallen through. A partner had proven untrustworthy, and he'd returned early in the kind of mood that made his security team exchange nervous glances. He came through the front door like a storm, phone to his ear, speaking rapid Korean that sounded like controlled violence. 3 men in dark suits followed at a respectful distance. And then he saw her. Later, Jin Soo would try to explain what happened in that moment. The way time seemed to slow. The way his sentence trailed off mid-word. The way every thought in his head went suddenly, inexplicably quiet. Lila stood there in simple jeans and a modest blue blouse, her natural hair pulled back, her dark skin striking against all that white, her eyes meeting his with something he hadn't seen in years. Not fear, not calculation, not desire or ambition, just presence. "Mr. Choi, this is Lila, the new household staff from America," Mrs. Park said in careful English. Lila bowed slightly. Jennifer had coached her on Korean customs during the flight. "Hello, thank you for this opportunity." Her voice was low, warm, with a southern accent that sounded completely foreign in this space. Jin Soo stared for 3 seconds too long enough that his head of security shifted uncomfortably. Long enough that Mrs. Park looked concerned. "Welcome." His English was perfect, accent slight. "Mrs. Park will show you everything." He walked past, but something had shifted. In the air, in his chest, in the careful order of his controlled world. Jin Soo went to his study and stood at the window for 20 minutes, not processing a single thought except, who was that woman? And why did it feel like he'd been waiting for her? The first week was silent observation. Lila learned the house, 7,000 square feet of luxury that felt cold despite the expensive heating system. She learned Jin Soo's schedule, early riser, late worker, rarely home except to sleep. She learned that the kitchen staff spoke some English, that Mrs. Park was protective, that the security team treated her with polite distance. And she learned that Jin Soo watched her. Not obviously. Not inappropriately. But she'd feel his eyes when she was arranging flowers in the main hall. When she was serving tea during his rare home meetings. When she was simply existing in his space. Jin Soo told himself it was security consciousness. New staff required observation. It was protocol. But that didn't explain why he'd changed his morning routine to pass through the kitchen when she was preparing breakfast for the household staff. Why he'd started taking coffee in the sunroom where she cleaned each morning. Why he'd asked Mrs. Park, casually, as if it didn't matter, about her background. The first words they exchanged beyond pleasantries came on day 5. Lila was dusting the library, floor-to-ceiling books in Korean, English, Chinese. Jin Soo entered, stopped when he saw her. "You read?" he asked. She turned, surprised. "When I have time. Your collection is, impressive." "Most are my grandfather's. I've read perhaps a quarter." "That's still more than most." A small smile. "I grew up in libraries, couldn't afford books, but the library was free." Something flickered in his expression. Understanding, maybe, or curiosity. "Take whatever you'd like. They should be read." It was the kindest thing anyone in Seoul had said to her. By November, a pattern had formed. Morning coffee exchanges. Jin Soo would sit in the sunroom with his tablet and newspaper. Lila would bring fresh coffee. She'd learned he took it black, scalding hot, in a specific ceramic mug. Some mornings they'd talk. Small things. Weather, books, her adjustment to Seoul. "Everything is so fast here," she said one morning. "Atlanta was busy, but this is different. Like the whole city is racing toward something." Money, status, survival, same thing everyone races toward, Jin Soo replied. That sounds exhausting. It is. He paused. What did you race toward? Before here? She was quiet for a moment. Time. Just more time. He didn't push, but later Mrs. Park mentioned Lila's mother, the cancer, the sacrifices. And Jin Soo understood why this woman carried grief like a second skin. The cultural exchanges happened organically. Lila asked about Korean holidays. Chuseok had just passed. Jin Soo found himself explaining traditions his family no longer practiced. She told him about Thanksgiving coming up, about her mother's sweet potato pie, about gospel music and church communities he couldn't imagine. He started leaving Korean language books in the library where she'd find them. She started preparing coffee the way she'd learned from an Ethiopian restaurant in Atlanta, showing Mrs. Park, who showed the kitchen staff, who told Jin Soo it was the best coffee they'd made, small threads weaving together. But Jin Soo was engaged, and Lila was his employee, and both of them felt the wrongness of the connection forming between them. Jin-ah visited twice that month. She barely acknowledged Lila. Staff were invisible to her. But Lila saw how Jin Soo was with his fiancée. Polite, formal, distant, like he was playing a role in his own life. The first moment of real vulnerability came on November 23rd. Lila was in the kitchen late, Thanksgiving back home, and she was crying quietly while making herself tea. Jin Soo found her there. He should have left. Instead, he sat across from her. Tell me about her. Your mother, he said quietly, and Lila did. For an hour, she talked, and Jin Soo, a man who trusted no one, listened. December brought snow and everything changed. A business situation went wrong. Violently wrong. Jin Soo came home at 3 a.m. with blood on his shirt, not his own, and a darkness in his eyes that Lila had never seen. She was awake, couldn't sleep, was reading in the staff quarters when she heard him. Against every rule, every protocol, she went to him. He was in his study, staring at his hands. Mr. Choi, she began. You should go. You shouldn't see me like this, he said without looking up. But she didn't go. She sat down, and she did something that shocked them both. She took his hand. I don't know what you did tonight. I don't know what kind of man you have to be out there. But in here, right now, you're just someone who's hurting. And I know hurt. Jin Soo looked at her hand on his, dark skin against pale, warm against cold, alive in a way he'd forgotten existed. I'm not a good man, Lila. I'm not asking you to be. I'm asking you to be honest. And something broke open in his chest, years of walls crumbling in seconds. What if I told you that you're the only real thing in my life? That in 2 months, you've made me feel more than I have in 32 years. I'd say, she paused. I'd say I feel it too, and it scares me to death. That's when they both knew. This wasn't just connection. This was something that could destroy everything. Jin-ah wasn't stupid. By late December, she noticed the change in Jin Soo, the way he'd started spending more time at home, the way his eyes would track movement in the hallway, the way he'd smile, actually smile, at something one of the staff said. She did what any strategic woman would do. She started paying attention. And she saw Lila, really saw her for the first time. Beautiful, intelligent, carrying herself with a dignity that no amount of money could buy. Everything Jin-ah had but had never earned, this maid possessed naturally. Threat assessment, critical. Jin-ah's first move was subtle. Extra demands, unreasonable requests, watching to see how Lila would break. But Lila didn't break. She met every demand with grace, every slight with silence, every test with strength, which made Jin-ah's blood boil. On December 28th, Jin-ah called a meeting with the household staff. There will be changes in the new year. Some positions will no longer be necessary. Her eyes landed on Lila when she said it. Jin Soo wasn't there to hear it, but Mrs. Park was. And that night, in hushed Korean, she warned Lila, "Be careful. The mistress sees you as a problem." This was just the beginning. Because what neither woman knew was that in 3 months, everything would explode in the most devastating way possible. The next chapter of Jin Soo and Lila's story would test everything they'd built. The first test would involve Jin Ah's rage, a public humiliation, and the moment Jin Soo would have to choose between his empire and his heart. March 17th, 2015. 5 months after Lila arrived, the night everything shattered. Jin Ah had planned it perfectly. A dinner party, 20 guests, all important connections in Jin Soo's world. Politicians, business leaders, family allies. The kind of event where image was everything. And she'd made sure Lila was serving. The evening started normally. Lila moved through the dining room with quiet efficiency, pouring wine, clearing plates, invisible as staff were supposed to be. But Jin Ah had been drinking and watching and seething at the way Jin Soo's eyes would flicker to Lila, just for a second, just enough that Jin Ah noticed. At 9:47 p.m., it happened. Lila was pouring wine for a guest when Jin Ah stood, her voice cutting through the conversation like a knife. "Tell me something, Lila. In America, do maids usually try to seduce their employers? Is that part of your culture?" The room went silent. 20 pairs of eyes turned to Lila. Jin Soo's jaw tightened, but he was at the head of the table, trapped by protocol and witnesses. "I don't know what you mean, Miss Jin," Lila said quietly, her voice controlled. "Don't you?" Jin Ah laughed, cruel and sharp. "You've been here 5 months. You've made yourself comfortable, spending time in the library, taking coffee with my fiancé, acting as if you're family instead of hired help." One of the guests, an older businessman, chuckled uncomfortably. Another woman whispered to her companion in Korean. Lila understood enough to catch. American women have no shame. Jin Ah walked toward Lila, circling like a predator. "You're pretty, I'll give you that. Exotic. I'm sure that works well for you back in Atlanta. But here?" She paused. "You're just the help, and you need to remember your place." She reached out and grabbed Lila's arm, fingernails digging in. "So smile, pour the wine, and stay in your lane, or you'll be on a plane back to poverty before morning." Every instinct screamed at Lila to pull away, to defend herself, to fight. Her mother didn't raise her to accept this, but she also didn't raise her to be stupid. One word of defiance, and she'd lose everything. The job, the money she was sending home to pay her mother's medical debts, the stability she desperately needed. So she stood there, silent, humiliated, burning with rage she couldn't express. Jin Soo watched the woman he was falling in love with be degraded in his own home. Watched her shoulders straighten, watched her swallow pride and pain, watched her endure. And something fundamental shifted in him. Because in that moment, he saw who had real strength. And it wasn't the woman wearing his engagement ring. Jin Soo stood so abruptly his chair scraped against marble. "Jin Ah, let her go." His voice was ice. "Excuse me?" Jin Ah turned to him. "I said," his voice grew louder, "let her go, now." The room froze. In Korean culture, in this world, you didn't contradict your partner publicly, especially not over staff. Jin Ah released Lila's arm, confusion and rage warring on her face. Jin Soo walked around the table, positioned himself between them. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the room. "Lila has been nothing but professional. She works harder than anyone in this house, and she will be treated with respect under my roof. By everyone." He paused, looking at Jin Ah. "Including you." To the guests, he said in Korean, "I apologize for the disruption. Dinner is over." It was a dismissal, a humiliation, of his fiancée in front of their entire social circle. Jin Ah's face went white, then red. You're choosing her? Over me? Over your own? I'm choosing dignity, something you clearly don't understand, Jin Soo said quietly, dangerously. The guests left in awkward silence. Jin Ah locked herself in the master bedroom, and Lila stood in the empty dining room, trembling, knowing that Jin Soo had just destroyed his engagement, his alliance, possibly his business relationships, for her. Jin Ah didn't leave quietly. Over the next 2 weeks, she weaponized everything at her disposal. She called her father, the head of the Shin family, and told him Jin Soo was compromised, emotionally unstable, making decisions based on feelings for a foreign maid instead of strategic thinking. And she hired a private investigator to destroy Lila. March 30th, 2015. Jin Ah presented her evidence during what was supposed to be a business meeting between families. Jin Soo sat in a private room at an exclusive restaurant, surrounded by 6 men who controlled half of Seoul's underground economy. His future father-in-law, business partners, allied family heads, and Jin Ah with a manila folder she slid across the table. Before you make any final decisions about our engagement, you should know exactly who you're protecting, she said coldly. The folder contained Lila's entire history. Medical debt from her mother's cancer, $127,000. Eviction notices, repossessed car, a cousin in Atlanta with a drug arrest record, and photos. Lila entering a building in Seoul, a building known as a meetup point for various underground activities. What the photos didn't show. Lila had been there once, lost, asking for directions. The building was near a language school she'd enrolled in. But context didn't matter. Implication did. She's using you. Coming from nothing. Landing in your house. Playing on your sympathies. And you're so blinded by whatever she's offering that you can't see you're being manipulated, Jin Ah declared. One of the older men, Jin Soo's father's former partner, spoke in Korean. Women like this, they're survivors. They'll do whatever necessary. Can you really trust her? Another added, this looks weak, Jin Soo, like you can't control your own household. Jin Soo looked at the photos, at the debt records, at the evidence designed to paint Lila as calculating, desperate, dangerous. But then he saw something Jin Ah hadn't noticed. In the financial records, every payment Lila received, she sent 80% back to America. Not to her cousin, to hospitals, to her mother's estate, to the church that had helped with funeral costs. She was working herself to exhaustion to pay for a woman who was already dead, because honor mattered to her more than survival. He looked at Jin Ah. Do you know what I see here? A woman who, Jin Ah began. I see someone who lost everything and kept her integrity. Someone who sacrificed years of her life for family. Someone who works in a foreign country, faces discrimination daily, and still treats everyone with respect. He paused. I see everything you're not. Janae's father stood. If you break this engagement over a maid, the alliance is over. Our business arrangement, our territory agreements, everything. Jin Soo did the math in his head. Breaking with the Shin family would cost him approximately $40 million in annual revenue. 3 key political connections, protection in 2 major cities. It would weaken him in a world where weakness got you killed. His advisors were staring at him, waiting. Across town, Lila was packing her suitcases. Mrs. Park had warned her. This was bigger than a dinner party humiliation. This was business. This was power. And Lila wasn't naive. She knew what she was, an impossible complication in Jin Soo's impossible world. She'd booked a flight back to Atlanta for the next morning. She'd leave before Jin Soo had to make a choice that would destroy him. Jin Soo stood. The engagement is over. Draw up whatever contract dissolution you need. I'll pay any penalties required. You're making a mistake, the Shin patriarch said in Korean. Maybe, but it's my mistake to make, Jin Soo replied. He walked out of that restaurant knowing he'd just cost himself millions, allies, and the respect of half the people in that room. And then he drove home at dangerous speeds because Lila's airline confirmation email had been left open on the study computer, and he had maybe 4 hours before he lost the only real thing in his life. Jin Soo found Lila in her room at 11 p.m., suitcases on the bed, Bible and her mother's photos already packed. She looked up and her eyes were dry. She'd cried herself out hours ago. "You shouldn't be here," she said. "I know," he replied. "This is wrong, all of it. I'm your employee, you're engaged, Her voice broke. "I'm nobody, and you're destroying your entire life over someone who doesn't even belong in your world." Jin Soo closed the door behind him. "You're right, about all of it." He paused. "Except the part about being nobody. You're the only person in 5 years who's looked at me and seen a human being instead of a weapon or a bank account or a threat. That doesn't make this okay. Do you know what they'll say about me? What they already are saying? That I'm a gold digger, a seductress, I don't care what they say." "Well, I do!" Lila's anger flared. "I care that I came here to work with dignity, and now I'm the black maid who broke up an engagement. I care that my mama raised me better than this. I care that I'm falling in love with a man who kills people for a living." She'd said it. Out loud. The thing they'd both been avoiding. Falling in love? Jin Soo took 2 steps closer. "I ended the engagement 4 hours ago. I dissolved the business partnership. I walked away from $40 million and half my territory." He paused. "Does that sound like someone who's unsure?" "It sounds like someone who's going to regret it." Lila was crying now. "When the feeling wears off and you realize what you gave up for what? We can't even be together, publicly. Your world won't accept me. My God." She paused, softer. "My God probably won't either." This is where it almost ended. Right here, because Lila said the thing that cut deepest. "I don't know if I can live with who you are. The violence, the crime, the blood on your hands, that's not my world. That's not who my mother raised me to love." Jin Soo felt it like a physical wound. Because she was right. He was everything she'd been taught to avoid. A criminal, a killer, a man who lived in shadows. He turned to leave. Turned to let her go. Let her get on that plane. Let her escape before he destroyed her the way his father destroyed his mother. But Lila grabbed his arm. "I didn't say I couldn't love you. I said I don't know if I can live with it. There's a difference." They stood there, inches apart, both crying now. "What if I promise to get out? To leave this life?" Jin Soo asked. "Can you? Really?" "I don't know, but for you, I'll try." It wasn't a guarantee. It wasn't a fairy tale solution. It was just the truth. And Lila, woman of faith, woman of principle, woman who'd lost everything once before, had to make a choice. Stay and risk everything, or leave and wonder for the rest of her life what might have been. She looked at her packed suitcases, at her mother's Bible, at the man in front of her who'd given up his entire life for a chance at something real. "I'm not unpacking yet, but I'm canceling my flight." It was the smallest commitment possible. It was also everything. That night, they didn't kiss, didn't make promises they couldn't keep. They sat on the floor of her modest room and talked until sunrise about the impossible logistics of building something real from the wreckage they'd created. And they both knew. The hardest part was just beginning. Because Jin Ah wasn't done. The Shin family wasn't done. And Seoul's underground doesn't just let someone walk away. What came next would test whether love could survive in a world built on power and violence. The first week after the breaking point was chaos management. Jin-ah moved out within 48 hours, but not before destroying half the master bedroom in rage. Her father threatened legal action, then business retaliation, then simply cut all ties with a coldness that was somehow worse. 3 business partners requested meetings to reassess the relationship. 2 politicians stopped returning calls. 1 rival family started testing Jin Soo's weakened borders, pushing into territory that had been respected for years. The whispers through Seoul's underground were brutal. Jin Soo Choi has gone soft. Chose a woman over power. He's vulnerable. But Jin Soo did something unexpected. He leaned into it. He called a meeting of everyone who mattered, and he told them the truth. Yes, I ended my engagement. Yes, I've made decisions you don't understand. But I'm still the same man who built this empire. And anyone who thinks weakness made me choose love over convenience doesn't know me at all. He paused. Love takes more strength than fear ever will, and I'm done living afraid. It was a gamble, but it was also the truth spoken by a man who'd spent 33 years wearing masks. Some people respected it, some didn't, but everyone knew. Jin Soo wasn't hiding anymore. Meanwhile, Lila faced her own reckoning. Mrs. Park and the kitchen staff, who'd grown to love her, were supportive. But she also heard the whispers, felt the stares, knew that half of Seoul saw her as exactly what Jin Ah had called her. A seductress, a homewrecker, an opportunistic foreigner. It took everything she had not to run. Jin Soo had promised to try to leave his life. In May 2015, he started the process. It wasn't simple. You don't just quit organized crime. But Jin Soo was smart, strategic, and more motivated than he'd ever been. Step 1. Legitimize the businesses. The import-export company actually did legal imports and exports. That part was real. Jin Soo started shifting focus, selling off the illegal operations to allied families for negotiated prices. It cost him. 60% of his revenue disappeared in 6 months. But he reinvested in legitimate real estate, tech startups, pharmaceutical imports. Legal money. Step 2. Distance from violence. He promoted his second-in-command to handle any remaining underground business. Publicly, Jin Soo became a businessman. Private, philanthropic, boring. Step 3. Protect Lila. Because the most dangerous time in leaving criminal life is the transition. When you're vulnerable, when people want to send messages. Jin Soo hired private security specifically for her. Former military, professionals. Lila hated it, felt like a prisoner, but she understood. The hard part wasn't the business. It was identity. Jin Soo had been the boss since he was 19. Power was his language. Fear was his tool. Violence was always an option in his back pocket. Who was he without that? He didn't know, and that terrified him. There were nights he'd wake up in cold sweats, feeling weak, feeling exposed. Nights where Lila would find him in his study, staring at nothing. "You having regrets?" she asked one such night. "About you?" "Never, about who I'm becoming. Every day." "Who do you want to be?" He was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know, someone better, someone you don't have to make excuses for." "I'm not asking you to be perfect, Jin Soo. I'm asking you to be trying. There's a difference." She'd started calling him by his first name in private. It felt intimate in a way that physical touch didn't. By September 2015, Jin Soo had divested from 80% of his illegal operations. His income had dropped dramatically, from millions monthly to high 6 figures. Still wealthy by any measure, but nothing like before. And for the first time in his adult life, he could sleep without wondering if someone was planning to kill him. That was worth more than any amount of money. But the question remained, what were they to each other, officially? She was still technically staff. He was still technically her employer. They'd never even kissed. The tension was becoming unbearable. October 2015, 1 year after Lila arrived, Jin Soo did something he hadn't done in 15 years. He invited his extended family to dinner. Aunts, uncles, cousins who'd drifted away when he'd gone into his father's business. And he introduced them to Lila, not as staff, as the woman he loved. The reactions were mixed. His mother's sister, Aunt Mihua, was horrified. A black woman? Foreign? What would your mother say? She'd say, is she kind? Does she make you better? And the answer to both is yes, Jin Soo replied calmly. But his youngest cousin, Ji-woo, 23 and studying abroad, was fascinated. She'd grown up with K-pop, global culture, diversity. This is so cool. Lila, you have to tell me everything about Atlanta. Lila handled it with grace. She'd learned conversational Korean. Not fluent, but enough. She'd studied customs, practiced etiquette, asked Mrs. Park 1,000 questions. She wore a hanbok that night, a traditional Korean dress that Jin Soo had commissioned for her. Navy and gold, tailored perfectly. When she entered the room, several relatives gasped. Not because she looked foreign, because she looked stunning and respectful, and like someone who'd done her homework. The dinner was awkward, but it was also a start. Lila taught Ji-woo how to make her mother's peach cobbler. In exchange, Ji-woo taught Lila traditional Korean tea ceremony. They laughed over the cultural differences, bonded over the similarities. Jin Soo watched Lila navigate his family with patience and humor, and he fell even deeper in love. By December, they'd started creating their own traditions. Friday nights, Lila cooked Southern food. Jin Soo attempted to help, badly. They'd eat in the kitchen, the warmest room in the house, and talk about everything and nothing. Sunday mornings, Lila found a small international church in Itaewon. Jin Soo wasn't religious, but he went with her. Sat in the back, listened to gospel music in Korean, watched Lila's face light up during worship. He didn't believe in her God, but he believed in her. And that was enough. They watched Korean dramas together. She introduced him to Ava DuVernay films and Kendrick Lamar. He showed her Korean indie music and bought her books by Korean-American authors. They were creating something new. Not fully Korean, not fully American. Not his world, not hers. Theirs. But they still hadn't defined what theirs meant. Officially, legally, publicly. That changed on New Year's Eve, 2015. December 31st, 2015. 11:30 p.m. Jin Soo and Lila stood on the roof of the mansion, the only place in Seoul where the city lights didn't drown out the stars. He'd been nervous all day. Lila had noticed but didn't push. I need to tell you something, Jin Soo began. Okay. Lila waited. I'm not good at this, at feelings, at words. I've spent my whole life controlling everything, and with you, I have no control. You terrify me. He paused. But you also make me feel alive in a way I didn't know was possible. You make me want to be better. Not for power, not for image, but because you deserve someone better. He pulled a small box from his pocket. Not a ring, not yet. Inside, a key. This is to a house, not this mansion, a different one, smaller, in Hanam-dong, near the river. I bought it last month. Jin Soo, what? Lila looked confused. I'm asking you to live with me, officially. Not as staff, as my partner. I know it's not marriage. I know your faith, your values, but I'm asking you to build a life with me while I figure out how to be someone worthy of forever. Lila took the key, looked at it, looked at him. My mama would have a fit, unmarried, living together. That's not how I was raised. She paused. But she also taught me that grace means meeting people where they are, not where you wish they were. And you're trying, Jin Soo. You're changing your entire life. So yes. They kissed for the first time at midnight, while fireworks exploded over Seoul. 15 months after they met. After trials and heartbreak and impossible choices, It wasn't perfect, but it was real, and for both of them, that was revolutionary. May 2024, 9 years later. Jin Soo and Lila lived in that house in Hanamdong. 3 bedrooms, a garden that Lila tended obsessively, a kitchen that smelled like a fusion of kimchi and cornbread on any given Sunday. Jin Soo ran a legitimate real estate development company. He invested in affordable housing projects, something that would have made his younger self laugh. He made good money, lived comfortably, and slept without nightmares. He'd been completely out of organized crime for 7 years. Some former associates respected it. Some thought he was weak. He didn't care anymore what they thought. Lila got her nursing credentials recognized in Korea after 2 years of bureaucratic hell. She worked at an international clinic in Itaewon, specializing in immigrant and expat healthcare. She spoke fluent Korean now, with a southern accent that made her patients smile. They got married in 2018. Small ceremony. Ji-woo was there, Mrs. Park, a few friends from Lila's church, Jin Soo's Aunt Mi-hwa who'd come around. They had 2 ceremonies, one traditional Korean, one that incorporated Lila's Baptist traditions. They didn't have children. Lila had complications from stress during her mother's illness, and pregnancy wasn't likely. They'd talked about adoption. Maybe. Someday. For now, they had a goddaughter, Ji-woo's baby, born last year. A little girl named Mi-sun Grace, Korean and American name, just like the life her godparents built. Their daily routine, Jin Soo made coffee. He finally learned after 9 years. Lila cooked breakfast. They spoke a mix of Korean and English, sometimes mid-sentence. Friends who visited described their home as warm, the opposite of that cold marble mansion. They still fought. About cultural differences, about Jin Soo's remaining control issues, about Lila's tendency to take on everyone else's burdens. But they fought fair now, with respect, with love underneath the disagreement. Friday nights were still sacred. Lila cooked. They ate in the kitchen. They talked. Sunday mornings, Jin Soo still went to church with her. He still wasn't religious, but 2 years ago, during a sermon about redemption and grace, he cried for the first time since his mother's funeral. Lila held his hand and didn't say a word. They were happy. Not perfectly. Not without scars, but genuinely happy in a way neither thought possible back in 2014. So what can be taken from Jin Soo and Lila's journey? What does this Korean mafia boss and black maid love story teach about power, identity, sacrifice, and building a life across impossible divides? There are 4 powerful lessons here. When Jin Soo screamed, "Don't touch her again," at that dinner party, he wasn't just defending Lila. He was choosing dignity over status, real strength over performed power. The world often tells us that status equals worth. That position defines value. That power means having people beneath you. But Jin Soo learned what real power looks like. It's standing between the person you love and the world trying to diminish them. Even when it costs everything. This isn't just about cross-cultural relationships. It's about recognizing worth in every human being, regardless of their position, race, or circumstance. Lila told Jin Soo, "I don't know if I can live with who you are." That honesty, that refusal to pretend, gave him the push to actually change. People are often taught to hide doubts, to protect partners' feelings, to avoid difficult conversations. But real love requires truth, even painful truth. When Lila admitted her fears instead of just leaving, when Jin Soo admitted he didn't know how to be anyone other than the boss, that vulnerability became the foundation for something real. You can't build on pretense, only on truth. Jin Soo and Lila didn't ask each other to abandon their identities. They created space for both. If a Korean mafia boss can change his entire life for love, what does that say about anyone's capacity for transformation? Maybe everyone is more capable of change than they believe. Maybe love, real love, calls people to become better than they thought possible. And maybe grace is seeing someone's potential instead of just their past. And that's the story of Jin Soo and Lila. 10 years of impossible choices, 2 continents, 5 major trials, and a love that refused to recognize the boundaries the world tried to put around it. It's not a perfect story. It's a real one. Messy, complicated, beautiful because of the struggle, not despite it. Their journey proves that love can cross any border, survive any trial, and transform even the most hardened hearts. It shows that dignity matters more than status, that vulnerability is strength, and that real love is built, not found. From a cold marble mansion to a warm home filled with laughter, from a mafia boss and his maid to partners who chose each other every single day. From 2 broken people to 1 unbreakable bond. This is what happens when 2 worlds collide and refuse to stay apart. This is what happens when love becomes the most powerful choice of all.